Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel Learn with Tech Labs. So today we will learn how we can utilize PowerShell to do administrative tasks with Office 365. The idea here is to help system administrators to do their some of their daily tasks. So without wasting any time, let's get right into it. So speaking about the prerequisites, there's nothing much. You should be able to understand basics of PowerShell, and as the course goes on, I will also explain some of the codings with regards to PowerShell. Also, you need to be a working professional in Office 365. If not a working professional, then at least you should have some knowledge in Office 365 workloads like Teams, SharePoint, Exchange, and so on. So first, what we are going to do is we will install Azure AD module. Then we will connect to Azure AD via PowerShell. So let's do that now. Here I'm using Visual Studio Code, but you're free to use whatever you feel like. For example, you can use Windows Eyes, but I find Visual Studio Code a bit easier to work with. So first you need to install a module called Azure AD or Azure AD Preview. So Azure AD Preview is the new module which has more commands and flexibility. So I would recommend to go for the latter. I have also installed this Azure AD Preview. We can also check if the module is installed or not. So once you run this command, after that run this command get dash installed module, and you should see your module there. Okay, so I have this module installed. Alright, so we now see that Azure AD Preview module is there. Let's try to connect to Azure AD now. I'll select this, run. Okay, now don't be surprised if you don't get a pop-up here, because it must be in the background. So there we have it. So I'll just log in with my admin account. Alright, so here we are connected to Azure AD Cloud or Azure Cloud with our global admin account. Okay, now let's try to run our first command. What we will do is we will check the licenses and SKUs for our tenant. So let's do that now. I'll switch back to Visual Studio Code, and I'll run this command called get dash Azure AD subscribed SKU. So if I run it, I should see all the SKUs / licenses I have in my tenant. Okay, so here you can see that. Let me push it a little above. Okay, so currently I have two SKUs. One is flow free and the second one is business premium license. I have a trial for that. We also see the object ID. We also see the SKU ID, but let's say that I need more information of a particular SKU than what I'll do. What I'll do is I'll choose a SKU via its object ID. So let me copy this object ID of the business premium license, and then I put pipe on a format list so that it can show me every property it has. Let's run this. Okay, oh, where it went, there's a problem. Let's check it. Okay, so it's just Visual Studio suggesting that I should use the complete name of the format list and not its alias. So it doesn't matter, right now we are not doing any script, so we can move back to terminal and avoid this problem. So we have the output now, and we see that the consumed unit is 1, the total license is the total SKU number we have is 25. Basically the business premium licenses, we have 25 licenses for it, and 1 is consumed. There are service plans in it, like you know what this particular SKU contains, like SharePoint, YAM or Teams. So we can see that as well. Let's say that we just want to see the service plans that comes under this subscribed SKU. So what we will do is we will choose this object called service plan. Okay, now let's run this. Okay, as you can see that it's not giving me much information, right? It is like cluttered. So what I'll do, I'll use a parameter called expand property so that this property can be extended and it should show me all the details. Let's run this now. Okay, now I see the expanded properties and what this SKU actually contains. So you can see that it has a lot of things. So we'll focus on the major part like exchange, right? MFA premium. Okay, it should have Teams, Yammer, SharePoint, Exchange, Intune, and other things. So that's how we can see the service plans of a SKU. Let's move on to our next task, which is getting the user and user properties and exporting it to a file. Okay, let's move back to our Visual Studio Code. Okay, now let's see all the users that we currently have in our tenant. So I'll put cat dash Azure AD user. Then I'm interested in all the users, so I'll use all and make it true. Let's run this thing. Okay, so it is returning all list of users that we have currently in our tenant. So these are all the users we have there. We have their object IDs, we have their user principal names, what kind of member user they are, whether it's a member or a guest, so all this information. So now let's say that I would like to export this into a CSV file for XYZ reasons. So what I'll do is I'll put a pipefl and I will use export dash CSV to export it in a CSV. I'll choose a path, let's say C output, and I'll give it a name, let's say users 365.csv, and I'll make it a no type information so that I don't get extra information with Excel. Let's run this. Okay, I'll go back to the directory, C output. Okay, I have a report. Let's open it with Excel. Alright, so let's move ahead with our next task, which is creating a single user via PowerShell. Let me switch back to our VS Code. Okay, so we are gonna create a new user. So first what we will use is we need to create a password profile. So this particular object is created so that we can store a password in it. Okay, so this is basically a password profile. Okay, and in this password profile we will store a password that will be used in the creation of a user via another command. Okay, so let me here enter a password. Okay, so now a password is in place. By the way, these two commands are available in the official documentation of the command new dash Azure AD user. I will link it down in the description if needed. Okay, so I'll use this command new dash Azure AD user. Now it has many properties, or let's say attributes, but there are some mandatory properties that we need to mention so that the user can be created. So I'll begin with display name. Let's say test user. Then user principal name, I will say test user at my domain. The next mandatory attribute is whether this account should be enabled or disabled. So I'll say it should be enabled, so I'll mention true. Next is the usage location. Now usage location is an important part. Initially it's not a mandatory or attribute. I can create the user without this usage location, but if I'm going to assign this user a license in the later part, then usage location is indeed mandatory. So I'll say India. The next is mail nickname. Mail nickname is usually the part which is the part before this at in the user principal name. So I will again say test user. Alright, now let's run these three sets of commands. Okay, one attribute I forgot, which is password profile. And this is our password profile object which contains our password. So I'll copy this, paste it right here, select this, and now run this. Alright, let me move it ahead. Alright, so we can see that our user has been created. At the moment it doesn't have a license, but let's see how we can assign this user a license in the next part. Alright, so let's assign a license to the newly created user. I'm opening the official documentation for this command set dash Azure AD user license, which can be used to assign a license to the user. Now Microsoft is recommending to use Microsoft Graph PowerShell because eventually all these things will be moved to Graph PowerShell. That's why Microsoft is encouraging the customers to use Graph PowerShell instead, and it's a lot straightforward than other modules, so that's a good thing. We will touch on that in some time. So let's talk about this particular command. There are three steps involved in this. The first one is, you can just ignore the first two part here. Okay, the first one is this. So they are creating an object. So they are creating an object for assigning the license. So this particular object is for assigned license. In other words, the license which you will assign. To this object we will also add the SKU ID, okay, in this part, and add it to this object. The next part is, again, it's another object for assigned licenses. I want to bring your attention here that it says assigned licenses and it says assigned license. So it's nothing but the plural. Let's say you can say it plural object. So it can have multiple licenses that you can assign for a user, not just one single license. So what we will do, we will add this license here, okay, to this variable which contains plural assigned licenses, or in other words, it can have multiple licenses. And then we will assign this particular license to this plural licenses using the add licenses property and add it here. You will get a better idea when we do a demonstration of this. So let me just copy paste these four. It's better idea to just copy one at a time. So okay, let me go to VS Code. So here I have created one license object which will contain the SKU ID of the license that I want to assign. Next we will assign SKU ID to this object. So yeah, I also need to get the SKU ID here. So let me just run this again and get the ID for my business premium license. So there it is. I will copy this part. Okay, now let's say license dot SKU ID is equal to, alright, looks good. Let's move it with the next step and copy this part which says assigned licenses. Now what we will do is, to this assigned licenses object, we will add this license that needed to be assigned to the user. So obviously it looks a bit lengthy for just assigning a license. Obviously an administrator can't go to Azure AD, or come here in Office 365 admin portal, go to licenses and assign the license that he wants. But it comes in handy when you have a bunch of users and you want to assign them licenses. So that way it's easier and quicker. Alright, so let's add all of these into the memory. Okay. Alright, now let's run this command from Microsoft documentation called set dash Azure AD user license object ID user object ID and assigned licenses. So for that I need a user as well and the ID as well. So we just need to query this particular user here. So what I'll do, come here in the terminal, type get dash Azure AD user, then I can use search string and type test user here, enter. Alright, I have the object ID with me. Copy this and set dash Azure AD user license, then object ID, assigned licenses, and here I will say licenses. Okay, let's run this particular command. Okay, so it ran successfully. Let's verify it with the official documentation. Okay, that's all it's needed. We can quickly verify the assigned licenses for this user. Okay, so I'll put get dash, here I will get dash Azure AD user, then let's say I now have the object ID, or just press the up arrow key and you can get test user. I'm interested in the license part, so assigned, I should say assigned plans, assigned licenses. Okay, I'll say expand property. Alright, so as you can see that it is giving me the SKU ID of the plan that has been assigned. Okay, we can also do assigned plans to see the sub sub properties of this SKU ID, or you can say sub plans of this SKU ID using this. Oh, it says signed plans cannot be found. Okay, so what we will do is we will do a pipe FL here. Alright, so provision plans, okay, cool, assign plans. Okay, so what did we use before? Assign. Okay, so let's do that now. Select assigned plans, expand property. Now okay, so here we can see what all service plans under this SKU ID that got enabled for this user. So you can see that assigned stamp is there when this service plan was assigned. Okay, capability status enabled means that it is enabled, and the service plan ID. Okay, so this particular SKU ID, which is our business plan, it has these sub plans associated with it. So that's how you assign a license to a user using PowerShell. So now let's move on with our next task, which is creating users in bulk and assigning them licenses. So there are two ways to do it. One is if I go to the Azure portal and I search for, or go to Azure Active Directory here, go to users, So here I will find this option called bulk operations. Now it gives me an option to create users in bulk. What it does is it's gives me a CSV which can be downloaded and filled with the user properties like display name, account enabled, password, and etc. So and once you fill that, just you need to upload the file here and then submit it. Once this is done, your users will reflect here. The second way to do it is using obviously PowerShell. Okay, so here I'm on my VS Code. What we are going to do is we will have a list of users in a CSV from which we will create our users. So I have created this CSV which has some properties for the user. Let me save it first. I'll say import users dot should be a CSV and I would like to save it in output, save. Alright, so the CSV is now saved. Let's move on to the next steps. So again, just like we created a single user here, so we will need the same thing for the password profile. So let me just enter it here. Let me name it creating multiple users for our reference. Now what we can do is we can run a loop. First of all, the first steps is we need to import our CSV before we can run a loop. So I'll say users and import dash CSV, and I'll give the path just C backslash output backslash import users.csv came up automatically. Okay, so now what I can do is I can run a for each loop. Okay, and I can say for each user in users do something. So what I want to do is I want to create a new user, right? And I will say now I will fill all the mandatory attributes. So the first one would be let's say a display name. Okay, I'll say user dot display name. Okay, account enabled, or let's say user principal name, and I'll say user dot user principal name. Then the next is account enabled. I can say true, or let's say for some users initially I want to block them, so I'll just go to my CSV and make it false, but in this case I don't want to do that, so I can just say true here, or I can take this value from right from the CSV. So let's do that. Account enabled would be user dot account enabled. Next is your password profile, which is we have defined here, password profile, so I'll take that. Okay, next is mail nickname, which is user dot mail nickname. Next is usage location, so I'll say user dot usage location. So that's it. We have defined everything from the Excel. We have closed our loop. So Alright, so let me select all and run this once. Okay, so there are some errors. Let's see what are those. It says user dot okay, there's a problem here. It says that system nullable system boolean. Okay, so it means that this attribute called account enabled, it's not taking the value from user dot account enabled, simply because it is of a type string. User dot account enabled, the value which is coming here is a string, and account enabled needs a boolean value like true, false, 0, 1, so it needs that. So we can fix that without getting into much coding here. So what I'll do is first of all I'll define a variable. Let's say account enabled is equal to user dot account enabled. I'll put a if condition here. So let's say that if account enabled is equals to true, or I'll just say the string true, okay, then execute this. Else, let's say if I have decided to create a user, but I want to block it initially. I don't want to give him the access rights for some XYZ reasons. Initially it needs to be blocked. So what I'll do, I'll create else condition and copy this code from here, paste, and I will say account enabled is false, and here I will say account enabled is true. Now what this means is, to simply put it this way, if let's say the account enabled value which is coming from here, okay, here is true, then we will have our user created as sign in enabled. Otherwise the user will be sign in disabled, or the user will be blocked. Okay, let's verify our Excel here. So here I have defined a boolean value. Since it's coming as string, so I'll just keep it a string. So now true, true, false. So Tom Cruise should be a disabled user, or the sign in should be blocked for him. I'll save this part. Alright, let's go to Visual Studio Code. I'll save it here. Let me just load this CSV again. Okay, all looks good. Let's run this thing. Okay, so our users have now been created. Let's verify them in the Azure portal. Right now it's 20 users. Let me click on refresh. There are 23 users now. Let's click on M&M. Okay, so sign in is enabled here, which exactly we wanted. Let's check for Johnny Depp. Account status is enabled. Now let's check for Tom Cruise, which should be disabled user, or sign in should be blocked. Okay, so the account status for him is disabled. Alright, so that's how you create users in bulk using a CSV. Let's move ahead and give them licenses using PowerShell. Alright, so if you remember, we assigned a license to a single user here in this part. So we will use the same sets of commands to assign our this business premium license, which has this SKU ID. So what we will do is, we have the assigned license object. We have given this object the SKU ID for our business premium license. We will assign this license slash SKU ID to the assigned licenses object here. Okay, so once this is done, we will run through a loop and assign our new users the business premium license. So let's first verify, do they have any license or not. If I open this Tom Cruise user, let's go to licenses. Right now there is no license. Okay, alright, so what I'm gonna do is load this part again so that I can utilize it you know, just now. Okay, so it is loaded in the memory. Now I will just copy this. I also have the users in this CSV. What I'm really interested in is just the user principal name part, so we will use that. I'll again run through a loop, let's say for each users user in dollar users, and then run this. Okay, so we need the object ID for the respective users. So what I'm gonna do is I'll just put here, let's say, object ID, a variable which will contain get dash Azure AD user, and I'll say user principal name, which will be user dot user principal name from the CSV, obviously, and I'll say close it, then I'll say dot object ID because that's what I'm interested in. So once I have this object ID, I can just put it here and assign our license. So okay, it looks good. Now let's run this and hope that we don't run into any errors. Okay, there are errors. So it says get dash Azure AD user. Okay, my mistake. User principal name is not a property with Azure AD user, it is with MSOL user. So I'll say search string, I guess it will work. Search string, yeah. Okay, let's save it and run this again. More errors, obviously. Add dash object ID assigned licenses. It says cannot bind the parameter object ID because it is null. Okay, my mistake again. I've put a dollar here mistakenly, typo. Run this. Okay, this time it went through, it seems. So I am under Azure Active Directory. Let's verify whether the newly created users got the license or not. Let's check Tom Cruise. I will click on licenses here. Okay, so as you can see that the user got the license, and we can also see the features under this license, or you can say the assigned plans under this license that got enabled. Let's verify another user. So it's alright, so let's verify now. Okay, so that's how you assign licenses to the users, multiple users, via PowerShell. So this finishes up our first part of how to manage Azure AD via PowerShell. So far we installed the Azure AD module, we connected to Azure AD, we checked the licenses or SKUs in our tenant, we checked how we can get the user and user properties in Azure AD. We also exported it to a file in a CSV format. Then we created a single user. After that, we created users in bulk and assigned them licenses. In the next part of the video, we'll be seeing how we can create, manage security and dynamics groups. Next, we will see how we can create a script for reporting purposes for licenses. That's all. See you in the next video.